Alrighty, good afternoon everyone. I'm Elise Berry. I think I know pretty much everyone in here. I'm here to invite you to, thank you for coming to our workshop this afternoon, which is Combating Myths of Poverty and Homelessness with James Pennington and Kenny Washington from Back Bay Mission, who is celebrating their 100th year anniversary. So let's give them a round of applause. Alright.
Sure. So thank you everybody for being here. I know this is a terrible time, 3:30 in the afternoon, right? After you have one of those sticky rolls. Oh my gosh, sugar high in the morning, but sugar low in the afternoon. So thanks for being here. We would really like, especially the smaller group, to make this as interactive as it can be. So feel free to ask questions, interrupt, or throw in humor if you can. That'd be great too, because we want this really to be a shared experience. Because you're here to learn, and I know we have a couple other folks doing this work here. I don't know if the rest of you are doing work with poverty and unsheltered, but yeah, let's share from our experience and from our lives. So Kenny and I are going to introduce ourselves a little bit and share with you how we got here in the work we're doing. So Kenny, why don't you start?
Yeah. Like he said, I'm Kenny Washington. I'm the Director of Client Services.
And the new board vice president.
And the new board vice president. Wow.
Condolences.
Okay. Let me give myself a clap for that. Don't know what I got myself into. But yeah, I'm the Director of Client Services. I oversee all the direct service programs at Back Bay Mission. The people that we actually serve are low-income, elderly, disabled, and homeless. So across all program areas, that's the population that we actually serve. So we're not going to actually talk about some of the, we're going to introduce you all to some of the other programs that we have at the end of the presentation, but our main focus is going to be people that are unsheltered, homeless, and people living in poverty. Quite a few of you all do the work with children and families, and probably quite a few of the population that you all serve are either enter into homelessness or basically are living in poverty. So this should be educational for you all. I've been at this work for the last 12 years. I tell people pertaining to the homeless situation is that I was one of the people that I saw them, but I didn't. They was faceless to me. I could be driving down the street and I saw a homeless person and I said, oh, homeless, I keep going. They was faceless. And I said that's what I actually say about the homeless. You see them, but you don't. And as we was actually, we did a memorial service last year for the homeless people that had died on the street. And one of the things that one of the ladies said, who was previously homeless, is that I am a human being, a child of God, and treat me as that. Don't cross the street when you see me. Treat me as a human being. And that was pretty powerful because I always said that the homeless population is faceless. You see them, but you don't. So, like I said, 12 years ago when I started this journey and doing the work that I'm actually doing, I was one of those people. So if I can say that about myself, and I do the work each and every day and the passion that I have for that, then you can be honest with yourself about, do you view the homeless as being faceless? You see them, but you don't. They're in every community, whether we want to say that or not. At one time, the mayor of Biloxi said, we don't have a homeless issue. There is no homeless in Biloxi. And each one of us face different challenges pertaining to the homeless based on their situation. Like there's no homeless shelters in Biloxi. None. No homeless shelters at all. In your communities, they may be shelters. So we're at a disadvantage in the work that we're doing because we can't place them in a shelter. We can't refer them to a shelter. There was a city, Pascagoula, which is about 50 miles away. They had a shelter, but they ended up closing it. How does a city official, elected city official, say there is not a homeless issue in your community when they're walking around the streets each and every day? When the police is taking their camps and bulldozing them over. When they're allowing the homeless, they push them in one area and say it's okay for them to be there, and then 6 months later they need to leave. But I always say, until we find them a place to go where we expect them to be. Until we find them a place to go where we expect them to be. And one of the things that I always say pertaining to that, we all are a situation away from being in a situation. We all are a situation away from being in a situation.
Now, if you quote that, yeah, give credit to Kenny. Do you? Good. Good.
Yeah, so, and if you think about it, the homeless population that we actually serve, each one of them were a productive member of society at one time, but this thing called life, you all heard about it, life happens to us all. Injury at work, nasty divorce, loss of a family member, all that stuff happens. One negative situation after the next, and then your life spiral out of control. If you don't have a safety net in place to catch you, then you're in a homeless state. We've had college professors, Navy SEALs. These are people that are walking through our day center doors. College professor situation, his wife committed suicide in front of him. His life spiraled out of control. A college professor, not a person who drug and alcohol for the last 30 years. This was a college professor, a Navy SEAL. Mom, dad, brother, sister, cousin. If you all haven't seen a relative or a friend in years, he or she may be experiencing homelessness. A lot of them tend to keep it away from their family. We had a situation where it was this guy. I was leaving work one day, and a mother and daughter pulled up in the parking lot, said that I'm looking for my son and my brother. Have you seen him? And they gave me the name of him, and I said, yeah, I've seen him. I know who he is. But I said, I tell you what, they was looking for them. And I said, give me your number, and I'll give it to him. And if he wants to make contact with you, I'll ask him to do so. Because you really don't know what the relationship is with the family. And we can't force it upon them to say, okay, wow, your family's here. I really don't know what the relationship was. So I gave him the number, he ended up making contact with him. And what's a small world that we actually live in. There was actually from Montgomery, Alabama, my hometown that I actually grew up in. And they lived across the street from my aunt. So I probably played with their brother as a child. They lived directly across the street from my aunt. And I said, wow, small world. And so I speak with, he's still in a homeless state now. And I said, man, you don't want to go back to Montgomery to be with your family? He said, no. I'd rather figure it out on my own. I put myself in this situation. I'd rather figure it out on my own on the street. And that's what they actually do. They try to figure it out. Another thing, everybody don't want to be housed. But everybody deserves the opportunity to be housed. Everybody don't want to be housed. I spoke with this lady. I said, are you ready to be housed? She said, Kenny, I am housed. I just sleep in a different room every night. That's her mindset. I just sleep in a different room every night. I said, okay. So a month later, I asked her the same question. Do you want to be housed? And so you just continue to keep asking that question until the street sort of wears them out and say, hey, I'm ready for this opportunity now. I'm ready for this opportunity to be housed. And if you're not, just imagine you all downsizing to a duffel bag, everything that you own, everything that you think is worth value, and hit the streets of Louisville, Cleveland, wherever you may from, and try to figure out how you're going to survive. So that's a transition for you all. So just imagine them, people have been homeless 5, 10, 15 years, are moving into an apartment. It's a transition for them. We have a homeless veteran, sixplex, 6 apartments and a duplex for veterans that were previously homeless. All of them are attached to a VASH voucher. and that's Veteran Assisted for Supportive Housing. So each one of our units is attached to that. So it's the VA, the Biloxi Housing Authority, and Back Bay Mission. We were like the landlord. And so we had a vet who actually was homeless. He ended up moving into one of the apartments. And our apartments are fully furnished. Pots, pans, sheets, everything that you need. Only thing you need to do is bring your personal belongings in there. So he left, put his key on the coffee table and left. So one day I was driving to work on Friday, and I saw him. I said, yeah, there he is there. So I pulled over and I asked him, I said, I heard that you was having some issues with your house. And he said, yes. I said, I tell you what, if you come back to my office on Monday, it was Friday, we can help you get back into the unit. And if you don't, I understand. He chose to go back to the woods. He chose to go back to the woods. And so that's why I said that everybody don't want to be housed, but everybody deserves the opportunity to be housed.
Did you say why you wanted to go back to them?
So with being housed come responsibility and some structure. And he wasn't really ready to deal with it at that time. He was 60 plus, maybe 2 years later, he ended up getting Social Security, and he got an apartment on his own. And so he didn't have the guidelines of, you can't have your apartment trashed or whatever his situation was. So I thought that he didn't want to follow the guidelines of the program that we actually have. That's why he chose to go back to the woods. And sometimes they want to do it on their own terms instead of the requirements that we have asked of them. But we're flexible and we understand. You know, like some people, they don't actually want to, for you to help them out. They actually want to do it on their own. And then we have to display some flexibility of meeting them where they are too.
Exactly.
So I went to D.C. to the National Alliance to End Homelessness Conference. Came back about this sharing housing piece. Was excited about that. Now here you got two guys sharing a camp together, but don't want to live together. He said there's no way possible that I'm living with him. But you all out here in the woods together hanging out.
Element of freedom.
Yeah, so they said no. I thought the shared housing was a great idea. They do it on college campus every day. People from who don't have no idea who your roommate may be, and you end up sharing a house. So we're talking about two homeless guys who are sharing the same camp, but don't want to live together in an apartment.
May I start a discussion on this?
Go for it.
And this has been bugging me for a while, just trying to figure out what the right thing to do is. Because going back to your statement about meeting them where they are, I have a story to tell that was so disappointing for me because the church turned their back, the churches turned their back on the homeless veterans because they did not want to meet them where they were. Although they said, no, we're here, we want to listen to you, blah, blah, blah.
Meet you where you're at, yeah.
It was tough. We're not going to take our policy, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we went through this, and I facilitated. Before I joined the Retirement Housing Foundation, my mom sent me on this mission for the foundation to live with the homeless for a year in the shelters and on the streets, and help them come up with the solutions. So let's stop giving them solutions. Let's stop giving them money. We can write them a check. We're not going to write a check. And let's help them find the solutions. I'll write you a check for that. So I was funded to live on the streets for a year. Didn't spend anything because I was lived off of medical and all that. Right? And working with the homeless, went to the bottom line. This is the solution that they came with that everybody ran away from. So stop throwing money at us. Just understand that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And we are full of good intentions. All these churches, all these Christians walked away. We're full of good intentions. No questions about that. But they did not buy into the solution because the solution was just way too radical for them at that time. I don't know if it's still radical now. But at that time, because what they wanted to do was tear up parking lots. In the city, there are so many, like just idle parking lots. They want to tear up the parking lots and build paradise. Reverse the song. And what we want to do with those parking lots is to build a vertical urban garden, urban community gardens, live-work housing for veterans. That's a term we would use, right?
Yes.
Live-work housing for veterans, where it's just easy, right? We got a design. I got some architects involved in the UK to convert steel containers into a terrace. So recycling, and then they live in those terraces, and it's drip irrigation for the urban farms. Really high intensity, high tech stuff. We're not messing around. Right? That's the model. The problem was they wanted to grow weed. Yeah, because I said, well, we got herbs, we can sell markets, man, I would love to have some kale. Well, okay, let's say we know how to grow wheat, we know how to buy wheat, we know how to sell wheat, we know how to market it. What we want to do is prove that we can do this without your money. We don't want government money, we don't want church money, we just want you out the way. Just get out the way. Help us with the zoning. Help us, and help us with, if the church wants to get involved, but don't give us your money. Give us your bodies, give us your heart. Yeah. Be in line with us, be in the front line with us as we fight. That's when everybody disappeared. Yeah. Yep.
Was that, you said that was in the UK?
No, well, my friends in the UK came up with a design for the vertical gardens. But these guys were in Silicon Valley, the heart of Silicon Valley, San Jose. Ooh. So I lived 6 months in the showcase shelter. It was all over the papers, a really good press. First home, it was the first home model, something like that. Harm reduction, it was a big thing all over business. It was run like a prison. The first thing I did when I was there was I took a video, I posted it on Facebook, of a veteran climbing into the second bunk because they would not give him a bunk because he spoke out and complained. First thing we need to do is get the shelters off of the bureaucrats' hands and maybe give them to churches. Give them to somebody that's not going to run like a prison.
Well, there's that idea of low, medium, high barrier shelters. I think that's an issue. Like I, not to interrupt, but when I was in Phoenix, we had a very large shelter complex, but it was high barrier, right? Couldn't bring your pets, couldn't bring, you only had one bag. And so, there were thousands of camps around this shelter because people still wanted a sense of independence. That's the struggle, right?
Yep, exactly.
And that's kind of what we're struggling with, and what Kenny's talking about is.
That's exactly the word they use.
Yeah.
You're making us dependent.
Yeah.
Making us dependent on you.
So, we got to transition out of this homelessness into poverty. And James is going to speak on his journey here to Back Bay Mission and the work that he's doing in our vision of what's going to take place.
Yeah, and then we'll have hundreds of slides for you to look at, right? So, no, but for me, so I grew up in northern Mississippi, and this is a bit of my journey. And I'm going to make it a really short story, right? Boonville, Mississippi, and grew up in a family of poverty and in poverty. And white supremacists for the most part. They were part of the John Birch Society. They just don't wear hoods or burn crosses, right? And I remember my relatives talking about John Birch and going to John Birch meetings. Anyway, so my Aunt Annabelle said, "You're moving to Chicago with us, we're getting the heck out of here, right? Away from the family." And she was kind of the rebel, she was the one that was always out of the box. And so we moved to the south side of Chicago, which was quite a surprise for me, coming from rural Mississippi. But eventually, my parents moved there, got a job, because this was kind of, I guess, another migration, right? White folks moving to Chicago or to Milwaukee to get employment because there wasn't really good employment in northern Mississippi. And when my parents moved back up, a year later, I moved back in with them, and that was continued to be a difficult relationship with my dad, to say the least. And so I ran away from home. And spent about 8 months on the streets of Chicago, but couch hopping, which, by the way, often isn't considered homeless according to our federal government, right? But it is, because those couches wear thin and people say you're out of here. And did some other stuff to get housing, and then moved back in with my aunt for a while. So it was about a year journey for me, 6 months to a year. And I really never thought I would do this work because I always was going to go to college, right? I'm going to go to college, I'm going to get out of this, I'm going to be the first in my family. So I did, but then when I went to college and went on to seminary and graduated and started doing campus ministry, I would take students on these servant trips, right? We went to Haiti, we went to Mexico, we went to a place in the Tennessee mountains called Mountaintop, worked with the Appalachians. And that kind of got back into my blood and kind of reminded me from where I came, right? And I've always struggled a bit with my family connections. But my nephew also has been cyclically homeless. And he's my namesake, Jimmy Jr., because of his mental health issues, right? Diagnosed, unmedicated, schizophrenic, bipolar at best, schizophrenic at worst. So for me, it's kind of been a passion. And I feel like wherever I've been and wherever I've went, there's always been a part of that in my own journey and in the journey of my family. And so when I left the church, the Lutheran church, Lutheran tradition, I went into HIV/AIDS work. And of course, it's another population, especially the LGBTQIA population, queer population, high percentage of homelessness. And for the HIV positive community, a high percentage of poverty, right? And we actually had housing. Back in Madison, I was service director, kind of similar to what Kenny does with people who are HIV positive. We housed them, and we had about 60 units in Madison, Wisconsin. And so I did clean needle exchange too, which is another population that lives in poverty, lives in addiction. And so all these things kind of brought me to this point. And when I went back into the ministry in the UCC, it was at a historic church in Minneapolis, which was Spirit of the Lakes, which was primarily a queer church, that had several clergy in a row that kind of had really bad boundaries, so they're ready to shut the doors, and they said, come in and either throw the doors back open or shut it down. That was kind of where the conference was at that time. And so there I got to work a lot with the trans community, which again, employment issues, right? Poverty, and homelessness, and trading sex now on computers, right? You used to trade it on the streets and with computers. So for me, there's just been this long journey and trying to understand and really figure out this whole issue and the myths around poverty and homelessness. I still have probably my own myths and my own struggles because, as I was telling Kenny a little bit earlier, there are days that I fully acknowledge our unsheltered brothers and sisters, or people living in poverty, or us and we are them, and we're together in this thing, right? And there are other times I want to turn away too, because the work becomes really challenging and difficult. And I think, like Kenny said, his quote, "We're always one situation away from a situation," kind of been there, done that myself, and feel really fortunate with my own privilege to do what I do, right? And I used to be pay to be gay, we call it, right? When you do HIV/AIDS work, I ran an LGBT community center. And again, there were homeless and runaway and throwaway youth, ran a shelter. So I've done all this work, which hopefully will come into its culmination at Back Bay Mission. Been there a year, and I really respected our new director, right? Because he's like, I can't set a vision yet. And I've kind of had to wait a year to attempt to set the vision, right? And it's still unfolding. And so kind of what we're going to go through today is a little bit, I guess, raising awareness for ourselves, because I think we all probably, we live in this world, we're together, we need to see our unsheltered and our friends who live in poverty as us, as human. You know, for me, it's kind of like smiling, eye contact, and if you don't feel comfortable giving them money, which if you give them money, who cares what they do with it, right? That's their choice. It's our choice what we do with our money. You know, give them an energy bar, give them water, and the kind of services we have. And that's kind of what I tried to model back in Phoenix. So we had a large feeding program and a needle exchange program in the church. And so Kenny and I are going to kind of just, I guess, draw on our own experience and hopefully your experience, have an opportunity to kind of work through some of the myths, do some maybe deep thinking about this for ourselves, and then how do you make application of that to the work that you do in the world of your ministry? And I know, Jason, if you have stuff to share, I'd love that. And it was interesting because I was in one of the break-on sessions on housing, and they started to talk about tiny homes, and kind of like tiny homes aren't the solution. They're not, but that's one model we're going to use as kind of a transitional model, hopefully next year at Back Bay Mission. We got a piece of property given to us by the Archdiocese, partnering with them. They're going to be kind of one bedroom. We have bathrooms on location and showers, an old gym from a Catholic school that actually got kind of washed off, right, off the map during Katrina.
Are those ADUs that are going to be tiny homes? Are you going to be using ADUs or on their own lots?
On there, well, it'll be kind of about 5 acres we have there. So they'll be placed on 5 acres. They'll be movable just in case we get flooded out or get a hurricane, and solar powered, completely solar powered.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I think that the point of the people in the housing group wasn't so much anti-tiny homes per se,
Yeah.
but rather land use. So
Exactly.
if you do ADUs for example, church members house a tiny home in their backyard,
Yep.
then that's okay. Because that's a really good use
Right.
of land.
And the
Whereas
best.
if you
Yeah.
take up land,
So-
that could be.
And the best thing for me, even though I haven't necessarily shared this that much, is that it's, so if you've ever been to Biloxi, right? Biloxi is kind of a little resort community. We're on the water, we're on the ocean, right? We've got our casinos. So 110 drops you right off on the beach, comes right off the 10 interstate. And it's right there, that piece of land is right next to 110. So number one, it's going to be somewhat of an eyesore. For our new mayor, Fofo, who is supporting this, by the way. Fofo is supporting it, it's a new mayor. Everybody in the Deep South has a nickname. So Fofo, Mayor Fofo, what's his real name? Andrew Gillich, right? So, and it's going to be a bit of an eyesore too, right? Because they're going to see these tiny homes, but it's also going to be kept clean and organized as much as we can, but low barrier, right?
Well, and I think what we were talking in there, I didn't want to get off track in that meeting, but it's a good idea, because what Kenny was saying, like, so in our community, we went to explore it, and can't because we have the benefit of a shelter. So the transition that Kenny was working on, you know, to go from woods to apartment, rough.
Yeah, tough.
Yeah, very.
Rough.
If you
But
don't have those skills, right? How do you manage it?
Right, but if you, and we have some, you know, camp living folk, but we've engaged for decades to utilize the shelter. Now, it could be utilized better if we had a place to then put people who don't need to be there.
Right.
So the tiny home idea in their situation would not really work in ours, because it would be, it wouldn't be the step
Right.
forward. But a great solution, because they still have this, but they're kind of on their own and spread out a
Some
little bit.
independence, right?
Right, so they're still doing it on their own, and they put some landscaping down, make it look nice. They have some buy-in, a little bit, to
Yeah.
keep it not be the eyesore.
Right.
Because you're not gonna build a
So-
$4 million shelter.
Yeah, so the location of the property that we actually have is sort of like off the beaten path, because that's been always the biggest challenge, not in my backyard.
Sure.
NIMBY is
So there was an old elementary school that the mayor was talking about turning into a shelter. Now, it was a wooded area, old golf course, where the homeless were actually camping at,
Yeah.
but they were saying not in my backyard, and they're already in your backyard.
Yeah.
You just don't see them.
Now, so to say not in my backyard, when
Right.
they're already there. But,
I'm
you
not
know, we
gonna-
talked with city councilmen and all of that, try to convince them that in order for a city to move forward, they have to start from the bottom up, not
Yeah.
from top down.
Yep.
And regardless, whether you want to accept them or not, they're part of our community.
Right.
So,
They're citizens,
yes. And
Oh, yeah.
one of the homeless guys told me,
residents.
he
Yep.
told me, he said, Kenny, as long as there's nice weather, the beaches and the casinos, we will be here.
Hey, do you guys have a casino tax or anything like that that goes into the city budget?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
And that's to the discretion of the mayor and the city council.
Sure is.
So-
We're working
So one
it.
thing I was gonna tell you, and I'm not gonna, you know, throw anybody under the bus, is the Salvation Army. Good Christian folk. We got, you know, CARES Act CV funding.
Yeah.
And how many complaints of all the time did we get about nuisance, people move it in places, nuisance complaints of, it's 3 people, right? It's the few that ruin it for the 100. And so I was like, all right, library, downtown church, who is the loudest complainer because, you know, they got mad from this church, they got mad from this church, and now they're downtown, but they're just there for the image of being downtown, not really to minister to downtown. So offer them, and then Salvation Army, you know, many complaints about people,
Yeah.
you know, using their wall. You know, so I called,
Your
and I'm like,
competition.
listen, I will pay, I have $50,000 for porta potties
Yeah.
to spend in 2 years. Let me put 2 there, And they're like, and so they talked about it, and it took like 2 or 3 weeks, and then finally, each of the locations essentially said, and Salvation Army freaked me out the most, was if we put it there,
That's the most hilarious thing.
but they're already using the wall, and you complain weekly that the EPD, our police department, has to use resources of officer time, utility equipment to come out there and rouse people or whatever, and the indignity. Oh my goodness! And I go, I understand what you're saying. Do not call the mayor's office or the police department with a complaint on this again, where I'm letting them know you refuse this as a solution, which you literally asked for 2 years ago in a meeting I was at. And I'm now solving this as best I can.
Well, and the same thing happened in Phoenix, right, with these thousands of tents around the central shelter. We wanted to put up porta potties, right?
Yeah.
We had the money, and they're like, but then they're going to use it. Right now, they're defecating in the street and you're complaining. You know, it just doesn't make sense. They're going to be drawn there. They're already there. It's
It was outside the Salvation Army.
Right.
They go, in a hand washing station, our external porta potties, I put 4 up at UCS for 2 years. We don't necessarily need them anymore. But I kept the hand washing station right by our courtyard because I asked all our tenants, or our guests, at day center, day shelter, I'm like, you guys need these anymore? And they were like, no, because so-and-so uses it at night, and so-and-so's the one that is pooping all over the place. We don't need those anymore, but could you keep the hand washing thing? Because that's nice for when we're walking in and out, just to be able to wash our hands anytime we want and not have to come inside.
Yeah.
And I'm like, done. And I'll pay for that forever.
Yeah, that's great.
I'm just reminded from this conversation, I'm reminded in Portland, we're pretty much trying everything. So we're doing tiny house, and we have low barrier shelters, and then
We do have tiny houses?
that is Portland's big focus. So they want to have 70 communities, 70 tiny house villages in Portland. Their goal is this year to have 7 built. And we're talking about small places like getting churches to give up their parking lot, and then that becomes a tiny house village.
Right.
And you get the church to open up, and that way you can use the bathrooms and stuff like that. And
Come to worship and potentially receive other care.
yeah, and we have one that's out by one of our highway overpasses that has a communal dining hall. So it's outside, everything's outside right now because of COVID. But so it's an outdoor tent, but it becomes the dining hall for the whole community.
Yeah.
Are you going to use a village concept? Like basically buy in, like you could almost with 5 acres have that almost be 2 separate villages with its own consumer advocacy board, so the residents help create the rule set.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that's the plan.
But the other thing we have is we have like Union Gospel Mission. There's
Yeah.
very, very, very high barriers. And they
Yeah.
have a particular group that finds that really helpful. So the
Yeah.
guy that runs Union Gospel Mission, he told me, Paul, if you come to Union Gospel Mission, you have hit the absolute bottom. You hit rock bottom. This is a monastery. You can't have any relationships because you're going to focus completely on your addiction. You've got a curfew. You've got all this. And he said, folks make it for about a week. If they're not going to make it in a week, you figure out, no, I can't have this. But if you do want to focus on it, then for the next 6 months or so, you're just going to be in AA forever.
Yeah.
And that's all you're going to focus on, and that's what you're going to, and you live there, and eventually you help run the place, and
Their residents become their staff. They have a
Right.
similar mission.
So
It's abstinence only on everything.
yeah, so it really works for a particular group of folks,
Straight.
and then
It's
low
not
barriers
trans.
works for some folks, and tiny house folks, and
Exactly.
then some folks just need to live in a tent.
Yep.
you know,
That's the bouquet, and that's okay.
Right. And that's their choice, right? That's the choice of the individual, as all of us make those choices.
So do you have any statistics on the growth in homelessness over the last few years?
Worse or worse? We've
So,
thrown trillions of dollars and this keeps getting worse.
yeah,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so once a year, we do what we call a point-in-time count, and that's a 24-hour snapshot of the homeless population, which is not really a true picture of it, it's just a snapshot of that. And depending on the day, when you actually do it.
And the weather.
Yes, so the number could fluctuate, so there's not really a hard count of the number of people that are homeless. Now, we probably, we have a day center for the homeless where we actually serve about 130 people a month. So those are unduplicated numbers. So about 130 a month that we actually serve at our day center. And what usually happens is that people who receive services from our day center are usually live within a 2-mile radius that they can actually walk there. So that's what usually happens is that anybody who's utilizing our day center, their camp or an abandoned building, wooded area, their car or whatever, they're sleeping within a 2-mile radius. So they can actually walk there in a short period of time. So the ones who live on the other side of Biloxi are not utilizing our service, just the ones and the 2-mile radius of what we say. So we don't really have any concrete numbers because really it's pretty difficult to get hard numbers. But I can tell you the number of people that we actually serve monthly in our day center, which is the day center for the homeless.
And generally, 2020's numbers nationwide were vastly underreported because
Underreported.
there were no evictions.
Right.
And there was all kinds of probably extra tax credit children and families, and I mean,
Yeah.
which was great because it kept people in their homes and stuff. But the numbers had been on a slight increase again over the past 2 to 3 years of a few percent over a few percent. And then this year's point-in-time count was just slightly up from last year, so again, underreported, at least all the experts say. But they're probably, before that, the trends were, huge thing, impact ending veteran homelessness.
Yes.
But, I mean, because it's been a 30-year effort, it's probably time to get some traction. But the only thing the United States really manufactures effectively are veterans. So, I guess,
Permanent housing.
yeah, we don't do auto manufacturing, we manufacture veterans.
Yeah.
Because we create wars. But so that was declining. And then chronic homelessness because of a push toward housing.
Yeah.
That's, over a certain amount of time, a couple instances within a year, was declining some because of permanent supportive housing. But family homelessness had been increasing because the SROs isn't solving it. We need 1, 2, 3 bedroom things, which are bigger footprints, and you're taking away from individuals. And in like 17, 18, or 18, 19 into 20, 25 to 35-year-old women.
Yep.
Because with substance use.
Well, the big push now is for unsheltered youth between 18 and 24.
Right.
That's so the federal government actually have a focus each and every year.
Exiting out of foster care.
Yes, who they want to focus on. So there was federal dollars available for the people 18 to 24 that are aging out of foster care. That they actually, federal funds are actually pushed in that
The one
direction.
had veteran focus a year or two ago.
Yeah,
right?
so with veterans now, they have a plan in place. If we identify that, we can contact someone from the VA, and they have a plan in place, depending on the availability of housing,
Right.
that they could be housed in less than a month.
Right. And there are plenty of VASH vouchers too.
Yes,
I mean,
so
really-
they could be, which is a good format that they have actually been utilizing. But when and you may have heard about they ending veterans homelessness. So with the point in time count, you identify the number of vets. So if it's 75 in your community and you house 75 people, you basically have ended it. From the perspective, because you have to have a number to aim towards,
Yeah.
but it's not actually ending it.
Funding allocation.
And
Yes.
the numbers here, because Louisville actually has, as far as our population, we have a higher than average number of homeless because we have better than average services
Yeah.
than in this region. But like when we do our point in count, our point in time count, they come up with this number, but then we've got programs where we partner with the local cops and stuff, where we actually go and do outreach, and we can actually identify the paths that are to the camps and,
Yes.
stuff like this, that they of course don't count. And then when they look at Jefferson County Public Schools and the number of kids that are reporting they're not consistently housed, those numbers are almost triple what our point in time count.
Well, that, then you get
So-
into category 1 versus the
Yeah, but so,
category 2.
so doubling up in a school setting is considered homeless. For the purpose of permanent supportive housing that we actually have, you have to be living in a place not meant for human habitation. And sleeping on someone's couch does not meet that criteria.
Right.
So you have two separate different numbers, so you really we can't utilize the number of doubling up for the purpose of point in time, because the definition of homelessness is completely different
Yeah.
for
And
school
yet,
as well
folks
as,
who work with families who have experienced ACEs in this level of trauma, you know that all of those have those impacts.
yes.
And can even, and for a point in time count, if we have 1,000 people in Biloxi, homeless, point in time count, or, they're there, the question is, where'd you sleep last night?
Yes.
Yep.
It's not where you sleep. You might be homeless tonight, but you're technically not homeless, because the last night, if about 999 people were in a hotel the night before,
We're on a couch.
or on a couch, there's one homeless person that night.
Right.
Well, you don't have a problem, right?
Right, because it's always,
Yeah.
I mean,
It's a
And I
moving
ran
number.
in with 3 point-in-time individuals, right, that I interviewed in the library over in Gulfport, that all were sleeping in abandoned trailers. Okay? But is that?
you
are
mean
they
like a single wide?
Yeah,
Oh, that's a home.
right?
And,
So that's,
But if it didn't have running utilities, it's not meant for habitation.
right.
Yeah, so that's the issue there, is
Yep.
that doubling up in the school system is considered homeless, but not according to HUD for our
Yeah.
definition of it.
Category 1, at least.
On stats, this is a fact. 10 years, at the end of the 10-year plan to end homelessness in Silicon Valley, the homeless population of veterans went up 300%.
Wow, really?
Good job. And here's another thing that's a hard truth I learned working with my year with the veterans, is that there's almost hatred in the homeless community for veterans, because they get special treatment. In the shelter, they had a special section. They got first dibs on the food. That's why the leaders I was working with, the Navy SEAL, Tian Graves, used to be a Navy SEAL, homeless guy. He was on the front page of the San Jose Mercury News with the mayor.
Yeah.
The mayor brought him out, like, ooh, how's it, blah, blah, blah. And it promised him housing, then for a year forgot about it. And so we made a lot of noise, and all of a sudden he got housing. That's a part of the propaganda. But what he said was, we don't need that special attention. We don't need that pressure put on us. What we want to do is help solve the problem. That's where you can use us, because we have the training. Now we can, what they wanted to do was that vertical thing, the basement would be a community center and a faith-based services, and that we're going to fund. And they wanted to house that with first 12 homeless veterans, and then from each of those 12, we'll spread out and build more of those models. So yeah, all over the country. So we can lead, we have leadership, we can provide security, we know how to provide security, we understand security, so that's not going to be a problem. Yeah, but yeah.
So we passed out a form there about the hidden roots that I found it fascinating. We have a program called Bridges Out of Poverty. So we teach people about poverty. So if you're fishing water, you really don't know what water is, because that's all you know. So if you're living in poverty, you don't really know what poverty is, because that's all you know. So so this is one of the forms that I pulled out of our Bridges Out of Poverty class, because if you look at it in the hidden roots based on poverty, middle class, and wealth, then you look at the mindset of people and how they think and how they actually get to the point to where they are. So I thought that was some great information to share with you all, so that you all can actually read that and have an understanding. Because people are living in poverty it's about the here and now. They're not worried about tomorrow. They are in survival mode 24/7, and they're about to hear it now. You know, you look at a situation where a person could be living in a shack, but if he or she is driving a nice car, the perception of everyone else outside of their neighborhood is that they got their stuff together. And so that's the mindset they have, is that if I can show you myself in a different light, you may think more highly of me. Not saying they're saving money to do something better for themselves over the long run. They only want to try to impress a person with what they have. Now that Bridges classes that we actually teach is mind-blowing of some of the mindsets that people have. Not only the clients that you actually work with, but also some of your family members, and you fully understand their mindset and how they function the way that they actually do. But these hidden rules are fascinating to me. If you look in each category and it talks about the different aspects on how people view what and what category, then you have a better understanding of the people that you are, most of the clients that you're actually working with are in this poverty level, and this is the mindset they actually have. So that's something that you can look at and read later. Pertaining to that, or if you have any questions pertaining to that, to me it's eye-opening to see that and to relate to that, to the work that you're actually doing.
As I read it, I was thinking of so our big issue is we want to come back to an end, all the pictures today were outside, if you notice that, because it's COVID land, right? And what we really want to get back to is being indoors. Our friends who live outside, for the most part, are not vaccinated, and masking up is not their favorite thing to do. And when I read this, I realize that's because I do not live in the present. I mean, I am not worried about my day-to-day. I actually am probably in the wealthy section where it's like I'm worried about my investments, I'm worried about the future. I think we should think globally about connections, we should think internationally. You know what I'm saying? So it's definitely, I come at this and saying, how could anybody not get vaccinated, get masked, because that's what the society needs, and that is, and it's just very eye-opening to think about that that's really not where my folks who are living on the street. Why would they give a damn about international, global, my connections, and the success of my stock
Are you
market?
going to be opener? Will we have a place tomorrow or not?
Well, exactly, yeah.
And will I be accepted?
And it's easy when those of us who do this work to kind of lose sight of that, because like you said, I have a wealth mind, right, not a poverty mind. And that's, I think, part of the challenge. Even I was thinking about this with Kenny, because we've had difficulties with our folks coming into the shelter, wearing their mask, keeping their mask on. And then just when you said that, I realized, gosh, that's not their main issue. It's kind of our issue, right? But it's not something they're thinking about the future.
Do you find either one of you, I mean, I'll self-admit here that, and I'll put it in words that make me look terrible, at least I think they do.
Good,
is
Jason.
that, because I'm a terrible person, is that the, emphasis on social exclusion. So, all we're touting and talking about in there in a big banquet room about RDEI and how we're going to change racism for the world or whatever, right? Yay us! Right column.
Yeah.
So here I'm aware of that.
Right.
So I'm doing the people I serve a favor by meeting them where they are, by at least trying to help them get to self-sufficiency. Now I'm meeting them, but I'm not, because I'm only going to the middle column. But I think I'm moving, but I'm still expecting them to move the exact same distance as me, which is unfixed self-sufficiency, right?
Yes.
It's the idea, because I know our people, the main thing they care about, and this is to what he was sort of saying, is we need to treat everybody like assholes. Like, if we are spreading indignity among the people we serve, they'll take it as long as we do it fairly. There's,
Yeah, I know what you mean.
in the immediate, right, I mean, they could be totally mistreated, but if everyone's mistreated equally, then they won't call out the disparity. Of course, we don't want to do that. We want to treat everyone fairly or with dignity and compassion. But that actually makes it harder because then favoritism, some people make it a lot easier than other people for you to like them or try to help them and things of that nature, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that is basically the social inclusion. That's where, that's just hard. And we don't do it well, not every day.
I mean, it's difficult work, and I tell our
So
staff.
my question is, how do you guys do it? What do you
Yeah,
do?
I mean, I tell our staff all the time is that there's a lot of toxic energy that's taking place in the work that we do every day. Because people come to us with problems, every day. Either food, either shelter, lack of shelter. Those are daily issues that we face. And so, if we don't, it goes back to self-care, if we don't care for ourselves, then the toxicity of what's taking place on a daily basis sucks us in, and then we have that negative mindset. We have that negative mindset, yes.
So, in terms of advocacy, are there key components that you're advocating for prevention?
Pertaining to,
So homelessness, yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's always hard to listen to all of the challenges and feel like there's not more you can do, make more mistakes. So it's always helpful to understand, as a consumer or as a, general public, what are you advocating for? What are things that are working?
you want to talk about your conversations that you actually have?
Yeah, so I was thinking, Kenny and I talk about this frequently. The Biloxi Businessmen Association, that particular story?
Yes.
Yeah, so the Biloxi Businessmen Association, I was invited to speak. And I was told that Alice, the previous executive director, went, and they gave her a lot of pushback. And she's a black woman, and then she told me, I called her before I went, because I'm like, what am I walking into? And she said, you may get a lot farther as a white male than I did. And I understand what she was saying. It's a room of about 60 older white men with a few younger men that are trying to kind of change the dynamics of the system. Men only. So I brought several black women to visit with me, and they know that, right? But anyway, so, I did my presentation, and toward the end of the presentation, I could tell that they were, not happy. And I don't know what your political persuasion is, but they're all pretty much Trumpsters or Republicans, And they said, so who are these people taking advantage of the Micah Day Drop-In Center? And I said, well, to be very honest, it's kind of popped into my mind. What I perceive is they're mostly older white men like you. And you could see their jaws drop, and they're like, oh, really? How did they get homeless? And so I kind of explained. And it's actually opened the door. Now, I never thought I would join the group, but I did. Because I feel I'm an important... Right. And now they're starting to ask questions. I get a moment at every meeting to talk about what's new with Back Bay Mission, what's new with this population. But it's changing hearts and changing minds and advocating with the business people of the movers and shakers on the coast, which probably were a part of the old Biloxi Mafia. I don't know, right?
Right.
But they're a fascinating group. And then actually, the president, Cree Cantrell, is now part of our capital campaign. So, you have to move in increments. Silly things like one of the, Dixie Newman is on the city council, and she owns a coffee shop a few blocks from Back Bay Mission, and she has not been a big advocate of the homeless population. My staff made that really clear, but I'm a coffee addict, and I know that's my privilege, right? I get to buy a cup of coffee. But I go and I support her, I communicate with her, I share with her. She gave $100 to a homeless family just a few weeks ago. And we put kind of an alert out, right? So it's bits by bits, and advocacy is really, 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 really important, right? Get in front of city council. Granted, we're a smaller community of maybe 50, 60,000, the coast is 350,000, but talk to the powers that be, right? And let them know about the situation. Let them know we have homeless people, and we have people that are on shelter, and we know we have a lot of people in poverty, because we do rehabs, and we actually get a little bit of funding from the city to do rehabs for people that are living in poverty and fixed incomes. But advocacy it's important. We have to advocate with the state too. Jackson level, even with our own, even with the organizations that dole out the HUD money, right, for our program. So, and then we have ESG, which is emergency assistance. That is solutions grant. We actually have some monies, right, that's keeping people in housing. That I see as more homeless prevention. And we also have Energy-Wise program, which kind of keeps people in their home, right? It gives them the tools to lower their energy bills so they don't have to make some of those tough choices. And then we actually have energy assistance. We have about $50,000 a year that we're able to assist people. That comes out of the kindness of really UCC congregations and individuals that fund us, right? Friends of our mission. So that's one way, because if you got to make a choice between paying your energy bill, right, or paying your rent. And then we also have a client choice food pantry, which very honestly, until actually I think I was living in Minneapolis, I finally got it. I'm like, a friend of mine was complaining about his neighbor's house and said, man, they need a can of paint. I said, well, they may have to choose between $35 for a gallon of paint to paint or $35 for groceries because they're living in poverty. Right? So that's one way with our client choice food pantry. Empowering people to choose what they want to eat rather than just handing a sack of food. So, Kenny, what did I miss?
Oh, you covered it all.
Oh,
So, but yeah, we just want to give them that opportunity. So we have a little, another little, to see if you can live in poverty, if you have those challenges in life, and you already said that you have a wealth mindset, so we're going to question your ability.
Push you a little
to
farther.
live.
I can't.
You can?
No.
We all can.
Well, while you're passing that out, because I don't want to hijack so the housing ready, the housing first. So the definition of homelessness has changed. That the idea is you can't end homelessness, but you can end a person's homelessness. And the definition of home, you want to make it short, rare, non-recurring. So a person may become homeless, but you want to make it short for them or rare for them, and if it happens, only once. And it's a person. We're not ending homelessness,
Yeah.
but we can end people or a person's homelessness.
Yeah.
So if you want to, join back to end a person's homelessness, you will be successful, but you will never end homelessness.
So, yeah, so
100%.
So say for instance, like if we have a homeless person who's been chronically homeless, and chronically mean homeless for a year or more, we set aside a year's worth of rental assistance for that person because we realize, we don't tell them that. We review their case month by month, but we don't tell them that. But we realize it's going to take a year for a person who's been on the streets forever to get adjusted
Is that
to be able
rapid
to...
housing?
No,
Or-
yeah, this is, the ESG, Emergency
Okay.
Solution Grant. So what we try to do, based on the family need, we make a projection of how much rental assistance we're going to provide for them. So if it's a person in between jobs and fell behind on their rent because it was in between jobs, we said, okay, about 3 months worth of rental assistance should get them back on their feet, them back working, and then they don't have to worry about their rent. So they should be in a better place. But a person who's been homeless for a year, 2, 3, 4 years, we realize it's going to take about a year worth of navigating the system to become sustainable, that he or she may be able to pay their rent themselves a year out. But we never tell anyone that we're going to actually pay your rent for 3 months, 6 months, or a year. Every month we actually review their file, or I sit down with the case manager, review their file, and say, what have they accomplished in the last 4 weeks? So should we or should we not pay their rent? And sometimes the case manager have to advocate for the clients because I said, no, we're not going to do it. So they have to advocate to me to approve it, that they're actually willing, they're making steps to actually do what they need to do in order for us to pay it, so.
Yeah.
One thing I would add to Mary's point about this, you said, so what can be done? So it's kind of on the, so there's a youth advocacy group in Portland, a youth shelter, called Janice Youth Programs. And Janice says, if a young person makes it to 23 living outside, then there is a huge likelihood that they're going to be in homelessness. Because if we really wanted to end homelessness, this is terrible, because now this is starting to say we're not going to support this, but chronically homeless, right, is probably going to stay chronically. If you really wanted to make a difference, you would focus on youth, you would prevent prevent someone from falling into houselessness, and you would do everything you could with support services and everything else. Most of the young people that I meet who are experiencing homelessness are, because they say it is safer to live on the street than it is to live at home. So now we're talking about child abuse, we're talking about sexual abuse, and the awful, awful, awful thing about the street is that the way you survive on the street, you may have fled sexual abuse, but the way you survive is survival sex. You sell yourself, and that's how you make money.
Yep.
So, shit, I mean, you've kind of gotten into it, and once you're into it, oh my God, now you're into it, and now you're into drugs and alcohol because you got to kind of figure out how you're going to, this is your reality. And so, yeah, so I think it really, if we really wanted to tackle it, I think it's going to be with youth. But that's also like saying, and we're writing off all this other folk, and there's going to be programs like me who are just feeding people and saying, yeah, I'm not solving anything, I'm just feeding you. So that's kind of the really ugly sad.
Are there federal policies, like, I know the U.S. is not supportive of housing as a human right, it doesn't look at it that way, so other countries finding that very successful. Are there any federal policies that we can rally behind that you're seeing, like with HUD or other kinds of things, programs?
I mean, we need more funding in order to house more people.
So right for more funding.
Yeah,
Gotcha,
so
okay.
that's the biggest challenge that we have. Like I said earlier, everybody doesn't want to be housed, but everybody deserves that opportunity to be housed.
Right.
And so if we can provide them with that opportunity,
Right.
then we're doing everything we possibly can. And it's sad that in our permanent supportive housing, that people have lived 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 years on the street, and they finally get housed, and within a 2-year span of time, based on being outside for such an extended period of time, they have all these health issues, and they end up dying. So they don't really get a chance to truly enjoy being housed because of all the other underlying issues that they've had that went untreated. And like my case manager found 3 of her clients dead inside of their house. I mean, and the last time she said, Kenny, I cannot continue to do this. I cannot keep knocking on doors and I find a dead body in the house. It's tough.
Which is kind of where our memorial, which is the first memorial we had for people that lost their lives on the street, kind of surfaced from, is Sarah, our case manager, and I had a friend in town.
Did you do it on the National Day?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I had a friend in town from Phoenix, and she happened to go out with Sarah that day, wanted to kind of shadow her. Fortunately, she's a healthcare worker. But she was there at the apartment when Sarah opened the door, and he was laying there, and had been dead for 3 days because he had COVID. And then I kind of tried to be pastor, right? Because that's where I see my dual role kind of happens. But it's and that I've noticed here more because I've never been a part of a program that houses adults. I've tangentially been a part, but to see that and those 3 individuals that she's already experienced died, and how hard that is for the case manager, but they died with dignity too.
Housed?
They died housed in their home, right? But maybe they didn't have very long, but they were there.
Yeah,
So they didn't die on the street.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the challenging part, though, is that trying to convince them there's a better opportunity for you, because there's a public health facility there called Coastal Family Health, which Back Bay Mission helped establish back in the 80s, that have a home healthcare grant, healthcare for the homeless grant, so they can receive free healthcare.
Is that your local FQHC?
Yeah, so we just have to do a letter of verifying the homelessness, so, because a lot of people try to beat the system and say they're homeless to get this free service. So we do a homeless verification letter with their outreach person to let them know. So they have free health care. It's just getting them to, or the health care is so poor when they actually go to the hospital, they get mixed diagnosed, and then they have other underlying issues that they're actually facing. So by the time they actually get housed, because the last person who died actually had cancer, but they mixed diagnosed saying that he had a kidney stone or something. But you know, those frequent trips to the emergency rooms, and they know that they're homeless, they're trying to get them in and out of there as quickly as possible.
Well, you know,
They don't see them.
right.
Yeah,
It's
Just
just
back to your point.
because one of the guys,
right.
he had diabetes, and he said, so I called the ambulance, and he said, where do you want to go? He said, could you take me to Memorial Hospital, which is in Gulfport? No, he said, take me to the VA, because he was a vet. And so they called to the VA hospital. They said, we can't accept it because of COVID or whatever. So he ended up going to the local hospital, but he didn't want to go there because he said, Kenny, they're just going to release me and I'm going to be back out on the street in 2 hours.
Right.
Away from everything else he knows too.
Yeah,
So it's our whole systems, right? If you want to advocate, we kind of have to advocate bottom up, top
Yes.
down,
On the
whatever
same
way
side.
we can, yeah.
you know.
For our
To
homeless
say-
population, a lot of local hospitals are just morgues with some waiting rooms.
Right.
But we fully realize is that if we can house it, it takes about $14,000 a year to house a person. It takes about $30,000 a year for the people that are not housed with
Right. Services.
frequent trips to jail, emergency rooms, and everything else that takes
Yes.
place. So it's cheaper to house them than for them to live on the streets.
But it goes back to that mindset of it should be about achievement, you should be self-sustaining, it's all of that. And if you take, and so if that's your model, then why would we help anybody? Because they should, pull yourself up for your bootstraps and everything else. And that's why we just keep on this.
So,
Right.
yeah, the conversation,
What is that?
we had these myths, and
It's not working.
We have these myths, but
It's not we have these all on our nice screen, but we can't get it to move now.
we had that to talk about the reality, facts and myths about that. But we didn't get a chance to actually, but
Can you send us the slides?
great conversation though.
What?
Can you send us the slides?
Yeah, we could.
Yeah, send them the slides and they'll send them out.
Well, and I think if you can advocate, one of the ways to advocate is exactly, I think, what you were saying, Elise, is we need to somehow get this into our mindset as human beings and as a nation, that it's a right to be housed. It's a human right, clean water,
Yes.
being housed, education, healthcare. Those are all human rights everybody should have, and love, right? And compassion. So those are the ways to really, it's about letter writing, email writing, it really is, and talking to the people that have power to make
Those
the
things
difference.
shouldn't be tied to other things.
No.
Because that's what, if you're not employed, you don't have healthcare, it's like,
That's housing ready of the Reagan era of the
there should
80s.
just be
Yeah.
nothing
Yeah.
tied to that.
You have to
These
earn
are
it.
Right.
What you
It's-
deserve as a human
Yeah.
being,
Yeah.
right?
Well, at least now we have
Yeah.
the housing first model, where you don't have to do A, B, and C before you have an opportunity to be housed. So you actually house them first, but that's also challenging too, is that you cannot put, they're saying that we should put people into housing and deal with all the other issues that they have while they're housed. So,
The challenge to landlord relations.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
and so, like with our permanent supportive housing program, the lease is in our name. And so if they evict that client from that unit, then they're gonna evict us also. And we may have 4 other units in that apartment complex. So that's the challenging part too, is that yes, we can house them, especially when the lease is in our name and they're sublease, but it's keeping them housed is a challenging part.
Yep.
When you are leaving food on your stove for 3 weeks, when you're
Leaving
not
mayonnaise
taking your
out.
trash out, when you're letting every homeless person that you know
Come in there.
come into your apartment, I mean, it's challenging work. Once it's easier to house them than to maintain them in-house.
Just like employment, it's easier to apply and get a job than it is to maintain.
Maintain it.
So I think maintenance is always what we're kind of aiming toward, but I do think that you can reasonably, in my opinion, provide that supportive structure. And I don't know if anyone remembers homemaker services.
Yes.
They kind of stopped paying for them, at least in Illinois. When I was a case manager like 30 years ago, I used to love every family homemaker services
Yes.
because they helped, right? They would help the
Parenting,
children, they would help the
cleaning
parenting,
the house.
they would help with cleaning the home.
Yes.
Like, let's say you're single and you didn't have children. So it would be homemaker, whatever your household management.
Yeah.
And do you know how many serious situations we avoided because they had a little bit of homemaker services?
Yes.
Even, I'm talking 10 hours a week, 2 hours a day of somebody helping you get your laundry ready, getting your food organized, whatever it is, prepare, getting your meal ready. And I think they let go of a lot of paraprofessional resource support that we could
So,
utilize.
Those
to
are
help.
those 1990 services.
I know, but
Yeah.
we need to bring them back.
Yeah.
It's like the old music, bring it back, we need it, remix it,
So,
put it in
yeah.
the mix. I'm like
My
it.
days as a case manager, we had
I love.
they call them
homemakers.
therapeutic homemakers
Yes, thank
in
you.
Florida that we actually would have.
Call
Because
it
we,
clinical, whatever you want. Yep.
so
Yeah.
when we was actually doing that, it prevented them from actually a court case.
Yeah.
We would place them on a volunteer family services. They signed an agreement to work with a therapeutic homemaker, and she assists them.
Yeah.
But it was more like neglect cases opposed to abuse cases. When
Yeah,
it was
this
actually
is hard to work.
So you're doing a little court diversion at the same time.
yes.
Right.
So we was for our neglect cases, we had the therapeutic homemaker. But if it was an abuse, we actually had to get court ordered supervision.
I'd love to bring that back. I just think it's something we don't utilize enough, just to help out a little bit. And even, they would transport them to their appointments. And
Yes.
like, if they have substance issue, they have to go to AA, whatever it is. When you have somebody bringing you, instead of you having to cross several, if you're worried about certain areas, right? We have people who have gang affiliation, they don't want to cross gang lines, they don't want to get on public transportation, but they will get in my car. Because I'm taking them from A to B.
Right.
They don't have to worry about if they had to get off the bus in a certain
Well, that's
territory, they're gang affiliated.
That's the success, is
Uber
the
is
navigation.
helpful.
Right.
So, I
Yeah,
mean,
it's-
some of these little
These
things
managers were
can,
really-
can
And
make
so,
it.
and like, and for a small town like Biloxi, the transportation system is challenging. To go 6 miles, it may take you an hour and a half,
Yes.
with all the stops and transfer and all of that.
We get in our.
That's a
own way
barrier.
To help.
Huge barrier.
Well, it also sounds like direct
Mental health.
service professionals that folks
Yeah.
with disabilities
I mean,
use,
Yeah.
VSPs.
Doors.
Yeah, right.
Department of Rehabilitative Services, yes,
Right.
we need that for.
Everybody, yeah, everybody.
Consequences of not doing it.
So, one last thing before we leave, you all heard today that we're celebrating our 100th year of service, so we have these lovely
Brochure.
brochures, so if you know anybody with deep pockets, please send them over.
Because none of us have big
I'm assuming nobody in the room. Right.
They're all doing
Accurate.
social work stuff, right? Church work, yeah. Well, and we will send these slides. I'm sorry we didn't get where we wanted to be, but that's good. So we have a set of slides basically on the myths of poverty and the myths of homelessness. And we had a bunch of slides of our kind of staff in action too. We got
Yeah,
off
please
track,
send it, yeah.
we couldn't use this anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good conversation.